What's up, everybody? Today we're going to take a little trip to JDM land. In this video, we're going to show you how to install your P3 gauge on your 10th gen Civic. The first thing we want to do on this install is check and make sure the gauge functions properly before we do the install. Each gauge is going to consist of three main components. We've got our display here, we've got our control box, and then we've got our main and OBD2 harness. So what we want to do is plug the harness into the one side of the control box. We'll plug our display into the other side of the control box. Now we'll simply just plug this into the OBD2 port and start the engine. It might take a second to fire up. You might see some dots. You might see the battery voltage. We are running here. We got data. It's changing with inputs. Good battery voltage, RPM. It's responding. If one's working, they're most likely all working, but we just want to check that before we start this process. So we are good to move forward. And what we want to do is lower your column and pull it all the way back to you to give yourself as much room to work around the dash as possible. And we are going to pull this top bezel off, and it's got 8 clips on it, so it is kind of really in there, and it's going to kind of move toward you and up. So if you kind of start on the edges and peel up, it'll just pop like that. And then you can see here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 clips, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 clips. So we'll set that aside. Next, we want to remove these 2 screws. One screw here, one screw here. That holds the top of the cluster bezel to the dash. There are also 2 screws that hold this little antenna to the top of the cluster. We do not need to remove those. There's enough slack in that cable to work around that. So go ahead and remove these 2 screws. They are Phillips. About the only tool you'll need for this install is a short screwdriver like this. Okay, so we've got those 2 screws out. Next thing we want to do is just grab a hold of the bottom of this trim and just give it a little tug straight toward you. And then at the top, and that brings this down, and we need access to this screw right here. Go ahead and remove that screw. It's also a Phillips. Once that's out of the way, we can push this whole side trim out. There's 2 or 3 clips right here that will need disconnected, and that's going to allow us to pull this trim forward. So kind of give little crisp tugs on it, and it should break it loose like that. And then you might want to grab over here and pull so you get one more loose, like that. And then we can pull this all forward until this vent, the back of this vent where the foam is, can rest on the front of the dash, and then that will have given you enough room to get this vent out. The next thing we're going to need to do is there are 2 screws back here that go through the back of the vent. We're going to need to remove those. Okay, so now you can see these 2 screws on the back of the vent. There is one here towards the front, and then one back here in the back. We're going to need to loosen those. I'm going to try to do this without blocking your view. First one, these are also both Phillips screws, so you can use the same screwdriver. And this is actually why you need a short screwdriver. You wouldn't want anything longer than this, just because there's not going to be room to get to these and get these loose. And we don't want you to have to take the whole dash apart to get this trim off, so we figured this is a good balance to just kind of get the dash peeled forward without risking breaking anything, and you don't have to take a bunch of the center stack apart to gain access to get this whole bezel trim off. Now that we have the 2 screws out, we just have 2 retainers on the top. They're little clips. So pull up on those clips as you're pulling down on the vent, and we should be able to roll the whole vent out as an assembly. Just pop and pop. Bring that guy out. Now we've got our vent out and ready to go take to the workbench to install our display in the vent. All right, we're here at the workbench, and our display is going to take the place of the top 3 slats, but we don't want to lose our horizontal vent control, so we're going to move this slat down to the bottom as well. You don't need this. It helps to have a little screwdriver, though. You can help pry these loose. These vents are really nice to work with. The edges are actually like kind of rubbery and flexible, so take that edge off. We'll take the other edge off. You see that they're nice and flexible, so you shouldn't be able to hurt them. And then we just need to pull this 3rd slat out like that. We can leave this together as an assembly. set it aside. And now we want our display to go in the top 3 positions on this bad boy. Like that. And then this slat is going to go in the bottom. And now one thing you want to note is the correct side up is this smooth side. You'll see on the bottom there's some mold lines and stuff that you wouldn't want to see. You can also see that this little fork in the back curves up when it's set up correctly. So that's going to go in the bottom position. Now we moved it down 1 position. Clip that into place, and now we want to make sure our vent is opened up so you can see light through it. We're going to feed our display cable with the pink side on the bottom right through the far left of the vent. Go ahead and pull that through, make sure it's not all twisted up and jumbled. And then as we're assembling this part, we want to make sure this fork mounts correctly onto this peg, so that way we maintain our sideways slider control. So as you're lining that up, make sure that fork goes on correctly. And then you're going to pop these 2 side pieces back into place. They should kind of give you a little bit of a snap, like so. And then we want to make sure that our fork is properly on our vent back there, and it is. I know it's hard for you to see on the camera. Then pull your display cable over to the side, pinch it, and then close the air flap in the back. And that's going to hold our cable in place and kind of make it more convenient to install this. And that is the display portion done. So now we can take this back out to the car and reinstall it in the dash. We are back in the car with our display already installed in the vent, and now we just need to pop it back in the dash and feed the cable down. So I would feed this through the opening just under the plenum. We should be able to get it to drop down and pull it through the bottom. And then we're just going to slide this back behind the dash, and we'll get the top 2 snaps engaged. That's clipped in. And then the 2 screws are a little bit tricky. So a trick that I like to use with hard to reach fasteners is to take a little piece of masking tape. And this works with Phillips fasteners or hex bolts, all kinds of stuff. Put it over the head of the fastener and then press your screwdriver in there, and that will kind of allow the screwdriver to hold the screw in place without it jiggling off too easily. It doesn't always work, but it usually helps at least, so you can get the screw started. And then once the tape's in there, you can either leave the tape in or pull the tape off. That's good. Pull the tape off. Get a second piece. And these really aren't too bad. It's definitely difficult installing these while filming and trying not to block the view. This will help that just a little bit. Get that one up in there, like so. Tighten that up. All right, perfect. And that's about the worst step during this whole install process, and now we're done. So now what we need to do is pull forward on your dash trim a little bit. Make sure that cable's got plenty of slack pulled through. And then we want to get the foam here, kind of bow it under so it can go back down in. And also in here, your right side of your cluster trim needs to be pulled back over probably. It pops, you'll feel it pop into place. And then we're just going to kind of snap all this back in. And you should feel everything positively snap into place, you'll know. And then we're going to put our top 2 screws back in and tighten those down. Good. And now we can put our top bezel back in place. And you do want to make sure that the end goes down into this trough, because it can pop over top. So you may put a hand on there and then just press the whole thing in. That's snapped into place. And now we need to feed our OBD2 harness down to the OBD2 port. And this dash actually has a lot of room underneath, so you can fit your hands through, but there's also a decent amount of wires. So if you can get the OBD2 port or plug fished past the wires, you should be able to get the connector to drop down by the OBD2 port fairly easily. One of those things where you can feel it better than you can see it. So there we go. And we only need to pull enough slack down just to plug into the OBD2 port, which is pretty close to where it drops through. And now we'll pull our display cable up and plug that into the other side of the control box. And then for the sake of this video, I'm just going to bundle these wires together and tie it together with the wire tie that comes with the gauge. But you can zip tie this, foam wrap it, do whatever you want. We're typically pulling gauges in and out of cars to do research and development and all that stuff. So I've always just kind of bundled stuff up and tucked it up, and I've never had a problem with rattling before. But to each their own. A lot of people like to take time and really bundle these up, but I know this is probably coming back out for development. So just tuck that in. And now we can push this side panel in nice and flush. We've got our last remaining screw here. That goes in this hole right here. So get that kind of snugged up. And the fitment on this is kind of loose. So once you get down to where you're tightening the screw, push over on it at the same time. That'll keep it pulled in nice and tight. And then on this piece, we just want to make sure all these tabs are lined up from bottom to top. And just one nice crisp press forward should snap it all in. We can slide our column back up and in. And then the last step is just going to be to start the engine. You might see dots going across the screen like that during this process. That's just the gauge kind of sensing the network and the battery voltage. If we go ahead and start the engine, you'll see them speed up now that it's getting network traffic. It's reading data from the ECU. The first startup is going to take a little bit longer than the rest of the starts, but once it's paired, as it did there, we're now going to have a nice quick startup every time. We can just make sure we're seeing some response with some throttle input. Maybe go look at RPM, and we're good. All right, so that wraps up this install. This has been a super easy install. This car has been great to work with so far. We've got a lot of plans for it. But if you have any questions about this install or anything to do with the Type R gauge, please let us know below in the comments. And please like, subscribe, and share our videos with your friends so they can learn about our gauges as well. We really appreciate your input and helping us out with that. And we'll see you in the next one. It really does need an exhaust.
It does.
You know what doesn't need an exhaust? Your mouth.